Good evening, my name is Eirini Tsetsilia and I am a PhD candidate at New Bulgarian University. I hold 2 postgraduate diplomas, the first in special education from the University of Nicosia and the second in pedagogy through innovative technologies and biomedical approaches of the University of West Attica. For the last 15 years I have been working as a mathematics teacher in schools in Greece. My research interests are for children with numeracy and learning difficulties in mathematics, but also the wider field of learning difficulties. Today we will talk about how language disorders can affect children's math. The paper presents a review of the relevant literature throughout computerized database searching on how students facing language difficulties may display deficits in their abilities on understanding and using mathematical thinking and discourse. Students with more or less severe language disorders typically struggle with academic performance and learning. However, the mechanisms by which language disorders affect mathematical performance are yet quite unclear. Previous research has shown that language difficulties negatively affect students' mathematical performance compared to students who do not face language impairment. Mathematics is characterized by multiple demands in both verbal and non-verbal representation, and therefore this paper holds potential for reviewing the role vocabulary, spelling, and reading difficulties play in developing math skills. Among other academic skills, mathematics and languages are the fundamental cornerstones for an efficient learning development. Multiple studies have examined that language and mathematics are 2 related academic domains and indicate that the development of language abilities not only predicts students' long-term mathematical learning, but also influences its early development. The components of language skills are divided into the categories of oral comprehension abilities and literacy skills, which include phonological processing, grammatical and vocabulary abilities, reading and writing skills. Mathematical learning is an accumulative process that conceptualizes basic arithmetic skills, complicated calculations, reasoning, and problem-solving skills. Both mathematics and languages are domains with accumulative abilities growing from smaller to larger units. During early school years, mathematical and literal phonological performances of students develops rapidly through formal instruction, and typically developing students show rather stable differences. Generally, it is noted that different components of language skills are involved in developing and performing different mathematical skills and tasks. On one hand, foundational skills, language skills, affect simpler, less complicated mathematical tasks. For example, phonological awareness and processing plays an important role in completing numerical tasks and calculation. On the other hand, complex language skills such as vocabulary skills and oral comprehension abilities affect mathematical sequences, thinking, and interactive advanced mathematical tasks, like, for example, tasks that require problem solving. It is worth noting that the term language is a multifaceted term and refers to the range of vocabulary held by students, but also the syntactic ability, which consists of a logical sequence of words. In conclusion, it is understandable that students with language deficits have difficulties in the logical sequence of mathematical operations and concepts. Literacy abilities influence students' performance on mathematics learning. As it is generally mentioned, math discourse is different from general language content, which complex verbal representations, symbols, notions, semantics, and syntactic structures. That is, students need to address specialized math language through modifying math problems with simpler equivalent concepts and semantic structures. Also, strategies with computer-assisted interventions could solve students' deficits in word/symbol identification, understanding, and processing. Furthermore, students' grammatical and basic arithmetic skills follow the common underlying principle of recursion, meaning that the order of words in sentences and of numbers/operational tasks in arithmetic problems determine their meaning. Similarly to the above, oral comprehension of math discourse is a key factor in students' performance. Several studies have shown that phonological processing is important in developing mathematical skills. On the one hand, phonological encoding helps convert arithmetic problems into verbal representations and using counting strategies. On the other hand, phonological memory through awareness and retrieval enables students to access long-term memory's capacity for informational mathematical discourse, to develop word learning to control working memory capacity. The development of language skills allows children to perform their initial numerical task, meaning children can verbally count objects into their environment. As a result, children are capable of knowing numbers, of understanding and acquiring the notions of ordinarity and cardinality. The verbal phonological coding and encoding are abilities used to establish and retrieve arithmetic facts, mathematical concepts and operations. Previous research indicates that the development of early numerical skills before primary academic years affect their mathematical development in later school years. Solving math problems is affected by students' language and cognitive deficits. Mathematical problem solving requires students to understand and process preparatory arithmetical concepts and operations, like, for example, conserving, classifying, seriating numbers, etc. Basic numeracy/computation tasks, like, for example, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and complex math abilities, like, for example, math reasoning, cause-effect analysis, combining patterns and strategies. As a result, students are expected to implement and combine procedures and specific steps. More specifically, the language skills involved in the process of math problem solving are phonological processing, reading comprehension skills, the ability to understand the slightly different meaning of vocabulary, terminology and syntactic forms in a mathematics concept, literacy skills, knowledge of math symbols. Moreover, working memory's capacity affects students' ability to map, store, and retrieve specific information. Finally, literature indicates that math problem solving should be addressed by sufficient and effective instructional inventions, which are not being restricted in teaching strategies for basic computational tasks. Working memory is an important cognitive skill underlining the relation between language and mathematics. Working memory's capacity affects the development of processing and storing information, so students' learning, verbal and non-verbal comprehension skills, language processing, and mathematic performance are influenced. Similarly, people with language disorders seem to have a distinctive deficit in working memory's capacity. Numerical, verbal, and visual spatial working memory are key factors in comprehending and expressing mathematical concepts, in processing numerical and calculation tasks, in controlling basic mathematical strategies, and in intermediating mathematics instructions. Language-centered mathematical learning depends on students' working memory, with research emphasizing that students with deficits in working memory's capacity require a more mathematical instruction rather than a focus in complex mathematical concepts and tasks. Language disorders are estimated to affect 7% of children without any known etiology. However, it is estimated that these difficulties affect mathematical thinking in two ways, both in terms of computing skills like numeracy operations and in terms of conceptual understanding of mathematical concepts. Students with language disorders exhibit poor mathematics skills in comparison to typically developing students of same age when they try to solve arithmetic tasks and math problems with basic or more complex calculations. Also, students with language disorders are less likely to use efficient math strategies or the same ones for different equivalent problems, and they avoid to use inversion, shortcuts over calculation operations. In general, there must be developed an understanding of language components and skills required in mathematical discourse that might introduce problems for students with language disorders. Students with language impairment face difficulties in the understanding, encoding, processing, recalling, and the organizing of language components. It should be noted that successful mathematical learning requires both verbal and non-verbal representations, as it is supported by three different types of representations: string digits, verbal representations of numbers, and analog representations, which is rendered throughout motives. Students with language difficulties have shown problems in developing cognitive mechanisms and language competencies for basic computational operations, numeracy, arithmetic calculations, and problem-solving tasks. Also, they have been challenged by technical math vocabulary and operational symbols, precise mathematical concepts, and complex syntactic structures. Literature review indicates that students with language impairment often encounter math difficulties as they have deficits in abilities such as sequential thinking, tracking order, descriptive analysis, comparing cause-effect understanding, problem-solving, and reasoning. Mathematical discourse is being affected by problems in using work memory to process and store patterns in a combined and intermediating complex mathematical vocabulary, representations, and syntax. Children's difficulties with language and mathematical skills show a great heterogeneity. However, their precursory signs can be identified during preschool years. Poor literacy and numeracy competencies can be defined by deficits in words, decoding, and students' reading fluency, and by deficits in acquiring basic numerical concepts and operations. At the same time, many students with reading disorders show math difficulties, and likewise many students with deficits in arithmetic processing and math problem solving experience language deficits. There is a high degree of comorbidity of reading a math disorder. Students who show comorbidity between language difficulties and mathematical difficulties seem to show more serious difficulties compared to students who present only mathematical difficulties. These students seem to have, in addition to the problem of learning adequate vocabulary, difficulties in terms of spelling, but also in terms of reading and understanding text. Phonological processing deficits seems to be the main cause of reading disorders, and deficits in representing number sense and in accessing/estimating symbolic/non-symbolic numbers seem to be the underlying core difficulties of math disorders. Both reading disorders and math difficulties show domain general deficits, such as deficits in process speed and/or in working memory capacity. Explaining the comorbidity between reading and math disorders, alternative explanations show that students with poor mathematical development is a consequence from different deficits patterns and different cognitive risk factors in the case of students with reading disorders and of students with mathematics disorders. The first case show deficits in verbal math notion and operations such as counting, poor performance to reading and writing numbers/symbols/problem information, and problem retrieving number facts. The second case show deficits in arithmetic tasks, symbolic numbers, and counting tasks, difficulties in identifying reading, writing symbols/numbers. Each language disorder, like dyslexia, developmental language disorder, specific language impairments, are reported to impact students' functional skills in long term. Students with language disorders seem to experience difficulties across disciplines in this curriculum. More specifically, students with developmental language disorder show mathematical problems relating to counting numbers, sense, and problem solving. Similarly, students with dyslexia have deficits in processing and performing counting tasks and are less fluent with number facts. Also, students with specific language impairment face difficulties in tasks requiring counting accuracy, knowledge of number line, and retrieving facts accuracy. At the same time, students face problems in adapting and in using alternative backup strategies when solving informational or narrative math problems. Language disorders may affect linguistic skills broadly across multiple academic domains and cognitive mechanisms, and as a result, students with language disorders could face severe barriers in mathematical learning. Students with language impairment are expected to face struggles when dealing with numbers transcoding, counting tasks, arithmetic operations, math conceptual understanding, verbal representation, problem solving, processing and retrieving speed, and procedural memory. Mathematical difficulties can be predicted by poor development of language abilities, and students struggle in mathematical tasks demanding verbal representations. Another variable that should be noted is that comorbidity between math and language difficulties may show no causal relationship. Rather, there may be a different causal explanation of concurring impairments. Mathematical instruction should focus in strategies such as verbal overload, but with engaging multiple modalities. The deficits in working memory could also be attended with proper structured instruction. Thank you.